Howdy, howdy. It's the Dreadful DM, Jordan, whatever, any other alias you want to call me. And today I have more of a long form video for y'all. And it's basically about how we in D&D and other, role playing games, as you want to say, create a story between the DM or GM and the characters, and then how both of them kind of mix together and then how the story kind of shapes from there. It's kind of more of a simpler topic, but I'm still early on to making this whole YouTube channel thing, so let's start off easy and let's not go straight off the deep end. So if you want to stick around and watch, cool, thanks. Like, comment, subscribe if you want to. Honestly, it doesn't really matter, but yeah, thanks for tuning in and let's get right into it. So let's first talk about the DM side of things. DM being the dungeon master, or you could go by GM, which is game master. They're both interchangeable. They both, represent the same person. The main role of this person being the guy who creates the story, gets the general plot points, the themes, the characters, anything that comes in between, the locations, spells, possibly the flavor of the whole entire place. The idea of a GM or DM is just to help guide the story. A lot of times I feel like the DM is supposed to be like, this is my story and you're supposed to stick to it. That's a mistake a lot of people make. The DM is supposed to help just like present a story, and so the players can go through it and play with it. So as a DM, your job is to present this kind of path, this kind of loose general path that is like, hey, let's go in this general direction, let's do this, let's have these type of things, let's have a kind of a Lord of the Rings style type of thing. Hey, big bad evil guy over there, let's go kill him. So everyone goes after that. When the motivations is, if you don't, the whole world ends. Very simple. It could be something as that, and that's typically what a lot of DMs start off with when they're playing the first game, making their first game. Is like, hey, it's very simple and it's been time tested that throughout millennia with humans that, hey, this works. The easy motivator for someone is to like, let's go kill that evil guy over there. So it's like, oh, okay, let's just go do that. And yes, it's very simple. It's very easy to make a story like that. And it's very simple to have different characters who might be a little more morally like, oh, I can make profit off of this or this, and that's lends to the DMs. It helps the DM make up a story in more enticing way to get more involved in the world than just be like, hey, the world's gonna end, so we might as well do something. As a DM, it's your responsibility to kind of hook your players, to want to get them to play in this world that you're making for them. And the world can be range from anything. Like I mentioned, the Lord of the Rings type of like romping through this like giant land, going through caves, flying through the skies or something, in this medieval fantasy, the elves, dwarves, and all of this. Your setting can more easily be that. It lends itself to an easy campaign because you can suspend your belief, like, oh, why does fireball exist? You're in this high fantasy place, it just exists, so it's a fun thing like that. Or if you want to be a DM that doesn't want to go deal with them, doesn't want to have a prototypical fantasy adventure type of thing, you can do a space adventure, you can do a western, you can have just a dungeon crawl where story might not be as important, but you're just constantly fighting enemies. See, as a DM, it's fun. It's fun to make a world. It can get tiring because I mentioned I made a video in past times where I talk about the plight of the forever DM, where you don't get a chance to play the characters, you get a chance to this. But being a DM also lends itself to a lot of satisfaction, the fact that you get a chance to explore a world, an idea, a theme you've been really thinking about in other type of literatures, film, shows. The great thing about role playing and TTRPGs and combat and stuff is that you have if done not even correctly, if done to your liking, you can have all aspects of these different type of medias and forms that elicit itself and produce a well-meaning kind of story that hits all those nice spots that you've been really craving. And the DM has the opportunity to share this story or adventure or kind of combat with friends, and it's great because it's just something you can get together with other people and make this giant epic and this cool story. It could be world-shattering events, or it could be very small. Maybe you're just a classic investigator investigating a small town murder and how it all dives into like the town being completely corrupt. This small municipal. There you go. That's please I'm dumb already. Don't make fun of me. But it could be something like that. The great thing about DMing and Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder in general, whatever system you use, is that these are just systems. This is just like these things that people talk about are just ways to like tell the story and this and that and the way that the general game mechanics work. But as being a DM and making the story a bit, that's completely relies on us. We can have these grand, giant, epic adventures that span years or months, days, whatever you want to do, or it could be a nice self-contained little thing where you're just a more lower level guy that's hanging out and just trying to go through life and dealing with everyday things, or like rising to the occasion, and maybe a battle between just like some random drunkard could be equal to fighting the big bad evil guy in a different campaign. That's a great thing about DMing. It's just depending how you present the story, how you show these characters, these NPCs, these enemies, these challenges to overcome. A small situation could be seen as a large victory. One thing over here, just dealing with a drunk guy in this, Lord of the Rings epic can be like, oh, a small little funny tidbit. But in another story, that could be like the climax of everything, That's the great thing about DMing. Depending on how you frame it, how you want it, how you want to shape your story, and how you create this story that your players can play, situations like this could have totally different tones and themes and different ideas behind it. You don't even have to make this giant epic. You can make a political intrigue and espionage of like different political factions that no one's really a good guy, but it's like you try and choose like who is the lesser of evils. That's always a fun bit of it. Is the more you DM, the more you play, you get more, I guess, not creative, or more creative, and also more willing to dive up the deep end. Besides making these just general story beats and general like, oh, evil guy, it's more like, hey, this group of people are kind of have decent reasons for doing what they're doing, but at the same time also harboring a good subsect of people or something, or the more small scale I was talking about, just like some farmer living in a world and beating up his bully or something. It's great. It's just making the story in which your players get very invested in. That's the whole thing. It's just the hooking your players. It doesn't matter the size, the scale. The size doesn't matter, guys. I swear. Look. That's what they told me. Okay. But I'm a fool sometimes, I apologize, but the size and scale of a world doesn't necessarily matter for the story. It's if you're able to hook your players on these incredible characters you might make, or these well-meaning, charming, endearing characters that your players would want to fight for, talk to, learn about. Those are the things that get a players hooked, because you can create this giant fantasy epic with this cool evil guy, but if your characters are lacking, that can also hinder much of the enjoyment. Is like, oh, these are just a bunch of cardboard pieces. Like, who am I fighting for? Am I just doing this because the world will end? You also gotta entice your people. But if you're in a slower lower stakes type of game, that's a little slower, that's a little more based on the development of these characters, that can also be more, that could be and stuff can be a little boring. It's like, oh yeah, this cool role play and talking back and forth, but there's not much leading to it. Like, what's my main end goal? And that's the whole part of DMing, of trying to find a good middle ground, or trying to find a good blend between having this evil, like not evil, but like this giant key aspect that you want your characters to achieve, but also at the same time intriguing them enough, and also pushing them to the point. It's like, I do need to clear this because this person cares about me in this world, or this because my oath I took. Things that get them invested and want them to keep, they want to keep going for what X, Y, or Z reason. That's the whole part of the DMing. That's also a little bit difficult, but at the same time, it's fun and rewarding, and finding that nice little middle ground. It doesn't need to be a middle ground. You can have the best of both worlds. If you're someone like a Matt Mercer or a Ben Lee Mulligan, if you're really good, you can have like both of them. But as for an average DM, for the dreadful DM, I know, a name that carries a lot of weight around here. I know. Like, if you go to P. Terry's, they know about me. They know. Just don't ask why. But it's fun. That's the great part about DMing or being a player. Well, being a player, we're going to talk about right now, but that's my part about being a DM, is having the story that you're trying to find a balance between these characters and the reason why they should do it. Also, the main key reason being interesting as well. and the different ways you want to do it. If you want to have a large scale, small scale, being a space epic odyssey that's traveling the universe, or being just some guy going throughout the countryside trying to find the meaning of life. These are cool, fun things, and the characters that you make, and also how the players interact with them, and how the players want to make a story as well. Because while I'm saying all this, the DM is not the only person playing the game. This is a cooperative game, storytelling game that is meant for you and I. So I'm gonna hop over to the character side of thing, that player side of thing. Apologies. I keep saying character interchangeably, but I just DM mine, apologies. But the player side of things and how they might want a story to present, how they are gonna want to put themselves in this world, and how they're gonna make, their own stakes in this world and their own motivations for wanting to fight the evil guy, or wanting to, find the reason for life, or whatever they're doing in this whatever campaign they're playing. So I'm gonna hop over there. So back. Shirt change next day, continuity stuff, just so someone doesn't yell at me. But let's continue with the whole character side of making a story. The DM, as I was talking about, is responsible for making the general world, the story points, the themes that will pop up within a campaign. But the character side, the player side of things, is a little bit different, because while the DM presents this world, you're the person that actually interacts with it, makes decisions with it. So stuff where people may die because of the decision you make, the world will change and alter and can form around your decisions, your way you think, the way you play the game. If you're a very thoughtful and, very, mature person, you can make, rash decisions that have a positive impact on it. Or if you're just a murder hobo and want to, kill everyone and do that type of thing, that also changes the world, greatly. So it's a good, fun time being a character. And of course, being a character player, or being a player, sorry, I keep saying character, being a player in this is fun, because even from the very beginning of just making your own character, there we go, is helping create and flesh out the world. Depending on what kind of story you made, you can be like, oh, I was part of this mafia and I was this informant, not informant, but like this, the muscle who would go around beating up people, and that can wove into the world. Like, oh, you were part of this well-known, crime family organization that's, will become a key plot point later. Or you'd be like, oh yeah, I was just a farm boy who, found the magical sword and now gets to, rule over, England. So stuff like that, that's place you're originally from is equivalent to the Shire in your world or whatever, even from the very beginning of character creation and what you want to do, from even the race you choose, whether you're like a tiefling, human, or a dragonborn, or whatever you may be, or what you want to call it, an orc, anything like that can also impact the world. Maybe in the race you come from, and maybe you might be seen as a little more brutish, like for orcs or something like that, or humans might be seen as normal stuff, things like that. Even just from the base of character creation, already start planting seeds of different type of story beats and different types of tones and themes throughout the world that can show up when you're playing with your friends. Also, a fun thing about being the players in this, while the DM controls the themes, the story points and all of that, everything I mentioned, the players mostly control the tone of the campaign, because when you're playing through it, you can very much go against the general themes and the atmosphere and the environment of the campaign. If the DM sets up this, cold, dark place of this haunted region that has these illithid spawn, these grotesque monsters that would gnaw you to your flesh and through your bones and everything like that, but you're just some guy called like Butt Muncher 82, it's going to change the tone a little bit. It's like if you're a bard who's going around singing, like Blueface lyrics, things are going to be very different. It's not going to change up. And that's another way you can impact the world and the story, is through the way you interact with it. I talked about it at the very beginning of this little section. But if you're being more of a goofball, if you're being more of a, of a goofy goober, as one might say, you're going to elicit a tone of more, more funny, more fantastic, more, not so serious tones of being like, hey, you know what, this is a very situation, but fart joke, and that might change the whole dynamic of the story, and that might get you and your friends in prison or killed or something. But if you want to be very serious, very, straight to the point, no, not a laughing matter type of guy, you're going to play more of a straight man. You're going to be more, have more decisions that align with, of maybe possibly the themes of the world of being more of a serious, dark, political romp when you're being like, oh yes, millions people lives are on the line, and you're taking that into consideration. And next to you is butt muncher. It's like, yeah, I just want ice cream. So it's fun. It could be juxtaposition between the themes, the worlds, between even the different other players within the campaign. That's the fun thing about being a player. Well, the DM controls the main overarching stuff, the characters, the players. They control the small in-betweens. They give the world the depth that sometimes that is needed, that the DM can't really account for every single bit. They're the ones who role play with the DM. They're the ones who role play with each other, who might establish new different type of connections, themes, different types of avenues of maybe exploring topics like grief, trauma, or maybe of dealing with past love, or trying to come up with the whole thing I was talking about earlier, purpose in life or something, stuff like this the DM can only go so far with, but it requires the players to interact with it, to be the ones to be like, what, this person over here has obviously gone through some things. Let me talk with them. Let me role play. Let me understand them. Let me get to know them, and that's how you get to reveal different types of characters. How you get to flesh out your own character, because backstory can only be enough. You can write this whole epic, but the way you play your character can be completely different the way they're portrayed within the story you wrote for the backstory and stuff like that. The way you just interact with the world is mostly important when coming with the players, because if it could be in a cool Lord of the Rings style world, with all these mystical beasts and these cool people, cat appearance, cool, cat, sorry, no. Cat was being a cute gal, but you can be in this world with that's fantastical and cool, that has endless possibilities. But if you're just some random dude, like, yeah, I'm just here to fight people, I can only do so much for the story and for each other and for your other players, because how do I role play with this person? How do I do with this? How do I get this person invested, or how do I get more out of them than I'm just a guy who hits stuff, which sometimes that could be good if you, depending on the story. I mentioned that sometimes you can do like a dungeon crawl where maybe that's all you need. But if you wanted to make a story in terms of more of like a epic, where you and your friends deal with different battles and also have a lot of downtime, talk about each other and express this shared connection with this world between you and your friends, there's going to need to be more than just some guy who hits stuff. But yeah, fun part of being a player. You get to enter the world, you get to mess around with it, you get to ruin things, you get to make decisions that could alter the plans of the DM. That'd be like, oh, I didn't expect that to happen. Well, let me change up a little bit. Or like, hey, that's cool. I didn't even think about that. You know what? Let's go with that. Let's let that be the key. Let that be the stuff. Whenever you're making a riddle, or maybe doing some type of trying to get some point across. But if the players sometimes make a better point than you might have thought, like, you know what? Let's go with that one instead. So that's also a cool way the players interact. They can change the way the DM thinks about the world, or maybe thinks about a certain player, a certain character, or a certain NPC, or whatever you want to talk about it, some place, shape, form. That's the great thing about this whole role-playing and storytelling things. While the DM is mostly doing it, the players can also talk back and can also shape their own type of story and their own type of wants, needs, and stuff that could also inflect what the DM wants to talk about. Maybe originally they had more of this type of prototypical trek through the world, going to save the king or queen or whatever you want to say. But in reality, that changes a lot at the very beginning, because they pivot and becomes more of this lower scale but like small town rescue group or something like that. It's fun. It's just depending on the characters and the players and how they want to talk it and want to change it. That's the way the story can evolve and the way we can work together. And that's how we get into the next bit of how the two combine with each other. I already talked a little bit right now about how the two combine each other to elicit the best type of story, the best type of outcome for a D&D campaign, in my opinion. So let's get right into that. Okay, so let's get into how the two kind of combine, mesh, and form together. I talked about a little bit earlier with how the decisions the players make and how they interact with the world can completely change how the DM decides to run something, and that's how they meld together, and that's how they can form and make this new world that maybe the DM didn't think of, or the player didn't think of, and how that might elicit themselves. Because sometimes, for example, you might see where the players might decide to go with the big bad. They might decide to switch sides. So now this guy who they thought was a giant arch nemesis is now like a big ally to them, and then people who they were once allied with now thinks that they're the devil or something, stuff like that. That's where this being together, playing together, and forming this new and interesting story comes together, and how they meld together. That's the main thing, is how they interact with one another and how they're willing to change and shape and form, because sometimes the DM is willing to change and do something that might fit the story more, and sometimes the players are willing to do or something. Maybe the way the player plays his character is a little bit different from how the backstory portrayed them, as I mentioned before, but maybe the world is a little more different than they anticipated, so now they form that character a little bit to meld with the world to make a better story, instead of trying to shoehorn a character in and trying to force something that might not work exactly. But sometimes it can work. Maybe sometimes you can have a typical like cowboy in a space odyssey, go for a space cowboy type of thing, that type of dealio. But sometimes, a lot of times, with the expectations between the DM and the players might not be completely one-to-one, so they might have to change a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit more magic heavy, so maybe they might flavor some of the spells to be a little more fantastical, maybe something like that. Maybe it's a little more grounded than expected, so maybe they have a little more martial, a little more kind of brutality to some type of the attacks or something like that. That's more dealing with combat, but maybe there's more griff and grime, so maybe this being this holly jolly little nothing's bad sunshine rainbow, it can work sometimes, but maybe you might want to shift it a little bit, maybe be more a little bit more naive to the world, and maybe a little bit more open to being more gruff and more I guess extreme to some extent. So that's the way, it's a give and take for both sides. Sometimes the DM is going to have to be willing to make a change for like, hey, maybe this isn't working per se, let me try this instead, and see if that can weld more with the characters, and the characters are going to be like, hey, let me do this instead, maybe to elicit more interesting role play or combat or whatever it may be. The way they form together, the way they're willing to make a story together, the way they listen to how the role play rolls out, and maybe the DM has a character that's a little bit more of an a-hole. That's something that initially anticipated, but they go with it because maybe it adds a really good dynamic for the rest of the team and gives the team a reason to be more motivated with the story. Like, hey, let's stop this guy because he's kind of an ass. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. It's going to be fun. It's exciting. It's way they bounce off each other, the way a story is made, because it's not just one guy telling them it's like, hey, this is going to happen, or it's not going to be like a couple people being like, hey, I just want to do this, and the guy's like, okay, so this is how it happens. It's the way how they bounce off and meld with each other. That's how I think the best way games like this of role-playing games, D&D, Pathfinder, whichever system you use, are best played with. It's not just the DM imposing its will onto players. It's not the players just being like, yeah, I just want to kill everyone. The DM are like, okay, there's got to be some level of pushback from both sides, the way they both form and craft this nicely made story, willing to go off the beaten path initially anticipated, or sometimes willing to stick with it, maybe because it's the best for everybody. It's the way things just gel together, things that willing to cut off for the sake because maybe it's not as good, or way things to add on because maybe you might have planned this like whole little roleplay section to last like 5 minutes, but then it turns out into a whole hour of going back and forth and more story and more elements being revealed. That's happened to me plenty of times, and especially for my last session I DM'd with starting. I'll get more into it when I go to the Dreadful DM Diaries or whatever that whole little series I'm doing. But a story bit, a little bit of roleplay. I only anticipated for maybe at most like 5 minutes, turned into this whole hour, and this reveals some cool lore and tidbits and stuff like that. That's the way how things can change and where you want to move on the fly and the way you want to do things. It's the way I feel like is best played. Is mostly just this understanding that both sides are trying to get something out of this game, out of this story, and how they're both willing to make changes here and there, willing to be like, I'm going to do this instead, or maybe I should do this to help get to that point where we're both satisfied, because no one's going to be 100% like the vision they had in their head is never going to be 100% realized or like put into action, because we are playing with multiple people who have a different type of vision and different type of thoughts. So the way that all can come together, because from player A to player B, from just like the bard and the barbarian, they could have two different ideas of what they want in a successful story. Maybe the barbarian just wants to go and kill people, but the bard wants to make these meaningful connections and stuff like that. So the way they compromise and make this cool story of how they just become these traveling misfits or something like that, and how the DM is going to have to shape and change the way the players are playing. Maybe you're playing with new players and this original idea of this grand epic that can rival Homer's Odyssey or something, but you realize, we got some new players here, let me dial back a little bit, let's have a little bit more conventional means, more conventional type of combat, more conventional type of roleplay section, so that they can also have that more easy experience getting into a game or something. It really depends on players, the DM, and how they want to talk. And that's also important, talking to your players, at the very beginning, and be like, hey, this is what I have laid out, the general ideas I want to talk, the kind of themes in the world, the kind of, environment, the setting and everything. And the players could be like, okay, cool, I want to play in that. And they might make a character around that, It's also very important just to keep an open line of communication. But that's a whole different thing we could talk about in a different episode, different video. So yeah, that's how I think the worlds can come together from both the DM and player side of things, and how they can form a nice story. And that's how this whole storytelling medium can be very useful and very fun for both sides. So yeah, I'm just gonna head over to my final thoughts. So yeah, that's the video. Thanks for watching. Trying to do more of these long form videos. They're a little more fun to make than just me kind of yapping out loud. I do like talking, but at the same time, I want to have a kind of a point that kind of, is a reason why I'm talking. Yap to yap is fun every once in a while, but I want to have, talk about something more, not meaningful, but more, pointed, more starting around a topic, or however we want to say it, or whatever we want, do with it. But it's fun, it's exciting, and I'm having a good time with it. Hopefully y'all liking it. It's just a nice time to also kind of basically talk with some friends about my thoughts, and not have someone tell me I'm an idiot automatically. They could tell me I'm an idiot later, but right now at least I can be like, yes, I have the talking stick. So but thanks for watching, whoever's watching. If you're not one of my friends and you just stumble up across the video, yo, thanks, appreciate it for watching. But if not, that's all I can say. I've yapped enough, and hope y'all doing good. Go take a walk. It's good for yourself, mentally, emotionally, and physically, of course, So, and yeah, I hope to talk to y'all later. Have a good day.